Good evening, everybody, and welcome to the Virgin StartUp Midsummer Meetup. So what have we got planned for you tonight? Tonight, we are talking about how to build and scale a food and drink startup. Now, if you are in the UK like I am, you will be aware that it seems that every day there's a new exciting food and drink brand bursting onto the scene through our Instagrams and street markets and onto the bigger shopping storefronts. And the choice and variety of quality, mission-driven, beautifully creative brands now compared to like even 10 years ago is fantastic. And I've been lucky to be part of some of those journeys early on, and representing a couple tonight before I introduce our all-star panel. One is Dashwater, perfect for this time of year. So Dashwater is set up by two guys who wanted to help tackle the food waste problem and make a beautiful summer sparkling drink without any sugar. So it's wonky fruits infused with in fizzy water, and it's delicious. And then the other shout out I wanted to give on the cold drinks front with Toast Ale. So this is made out of leftover bread, and leftover bread that you then turn into delicious beers, craft beers. So Toast Ale. So those are my two little drinks recommendations. The third one I wanted to shout out, mainly from a story point of view, is a drinks brand similar to Dash. It's a fizzy water brand, but it's called Ugly Drinks. And I worked with, alongside the co-founder of Ugly, Hugh Thomas, a few years ago at the Escape School in London. And I remember Hugh coming in, and he was working with me on leading this accelerator. And Hugh said, "So we've launched this brand of called Ugly Drinks, zero sugar. It's going really well. We've got it out everywhere. Well, we just found out this weekend that we've had to pull all 10,000 bottles off the shelf because the pH levels in all the drinks has just gone off overnight." And I was like, whoa, how much work? Where are you at? And he's like, well, it's been 3 years work. It's been friends and family's money. It's been a lot of sweat. It's been this, and this. I mean, we've all just had to like take it all off the shelf because something in the mix went wrong and they had to, that's it, done. So I spoke to him about a week later about it. I said, no, so what are you going to do? Are you moving on to something else? Are you going back to work in your old job? And he's like, well, because I've got a co-founder, Joe, and because we're really passionate about this, we're going to try and make it happen. We're going to try and go back to drawing board and start again. And they've done it. And like 4 or 5 years later, Ugly Drinks, especially in the States, is doing really, really well. The brand is very creative, like the ones we're going to meet tonight. And it's doing an amazing job. Anyway, so that's the story of a startup I've been connected with. But I would love to introduce in a moment, hold your horses, our three founding brands of food and drink startups we're going to get to know tonight. But beforehand, I want to give a shout out to our friends at Virgin Money who make this possible, basically. We're able to make this meetup free to attend, giving lots of advice and support and inspiration to people like you. And if you don't know about Virgin Money, they exist to disrupt the status quo. They want everyone to have a much happier relationship with money. And who can argue with that? Through their brilliant colleagues, inspiring spaces and digital solutions, they are doing everything they can to offer a life more Virgin. So if you are looking for support in that world, go and check out Virgin Money. So onto our stars tonight. I'm very excited to invite and welcome Neil Potts of the Vurger Co, Vivian Wang of Little Moons, and Ben Branson, not related to Sir Richard, of Seedlip, onto the Virgin Startup stage. Neil is here. Welcome, Neil. That's the Hi. Sound of 200 Virgin Startup founders cheering the three of you. Hey, Vivian. Hey, Ben. Welcome.
Welcome. Hello. Hello.
Hello. Lovely to see you all in the room tonight in the heat. You see, if we were doing this in a venue tonight, it would be tough to get 200 people in the room. So this works really well, even though we can't all see each other. So as you can see in the chat, we've got a lot of people from all over the world tuning in who are just excited to connect and learn from you and each other, and quite a lot of food and drink founders as well. So we're assuming from where we're sitting that people are here from all the way from curiosity through to idea, through to their, might be up and running for a few years with their idea and their project. And so we can learn about all the stages. But where I wanted to start, and for the next 45 minutes or so, before we then go into breakout rooms and everyone can meet each other and share their ideas, is really get to know the three of you and where it all began, and go back a little bit to start with. And so we'll share those stories shortly. But just really quickly up front, what's your favorite latest food and drink brand that you're into that isn't your own, that you're enjoying this summer? Vivian.
I really like this brand, the alternative meat.
Okay, tell us more.
Because I think it's really hard to do. Well, sorry, it's another one of your, some of your burgers. But I tried it. Someone asked me to try it at a dinner party, and I thought it was a really good copy of meat, and so I really like that brand.
And it's amazing, as we'll learn from Neil tonight, how many of these things have just popped up, seemingly popped up. There's been a lot of sweat, no meat, blood, and tears behind them. Neil, what about you? You're not going to tell us about a favorite meatless company, are you?
Could do. No, mine is Proper Chips. I've developed a rather, I think it's a healthy addiction. Proper Chips salt and vinegar. I think it's a new flavor. It's ridiculous, just like the best crisp / snack I've ever tried. I think it's amazing.
And is it the product that's winning you, or does the branding help? Like, why the love?
Yeah, the brand's great. We've also used their popcorn in our shakes before, but yeah, just came across this new flavor. I've had the barbecue ones before. They're a lentil chip. It's just like an amazing product. Very crispy, very Moorish.
Very crispy. The
branding's good too.
Why do you love it? It's very crispy. And they're like, that's what make them happy. Nice one. And Ben, you've been in this game for a while, so like you've seen so many come and go. What's your favorite at the moment?
I don't eat fish, but having come across the guys from Pesky Fish, have a look at them. They are disrupting a centuries-old industry with a really modern, considered, contemporary approach to how we source and eat fish. So yeah, have a look at them. They just raise a load of money.
And is it their mission? Like you talked about disrupting the industry. That's why you're a fan?
It's a bit of everything, actually. Yeah. It's kind of using tech in a really positive way. It meets a modern need that we have as a society, and it's trying to do a bit better for the planet. And yeah, young founders, very driven, incredibly ambitious. So wish
the whole package. Great name too. So Vivian, let's start with your story. So that let's take us back to when Little Moons was a twinkle in your eye. Like, where did the idea bubble up? What were you doing at the time, and how did you go from kind of idea to first version?
I'd thought about starting my own business for a really long time. I think back in maybe 2014, and 2004, and I didn't actually start Little Moons until 2010. But I was working my corporate job, and I just saw that sushi was taking off back in 2008 time. Everyone in the city was like carrying around a Nitsu bag, and sushi was going nuts. And I thought, there's no good desserts out there for Japanese restaurants. So my parents have a bakery that makes traditional mochi, and they fill it with red bean. And I tried the ice cream version with my brother when we'd been to America and Japan, and we just thought, look, this dessert is amazing. It's absolutely insane. I think it'd do really well over here, particularly as Japanese food is taking off. So we sort of just started having that idea really, and I think it starts with the idea, and then you start formulating a plan as to how you're going to do it, because the texture is so unusual. Anyone who's tried mochi, it's sort of like a soft, sweet dough. And I guess the story was we didn't think the market was ready for it, so we didn't sell it directly to the grocery stores, to the supermarkets, because we didn't think anyone would take it off the shelves. So we started selling it to restaurants first. So I approached a lot of high-end Mayfair Japanese restaurants, and they decided to put on the menu, mainly because a lot of them made them themselves, but then it's a really difficult product to handle. And I think we just made it really easy for them to serve because it came ready-made, and the quality was good enough for them to serve it as their own product. And so that's where we started it with in the restaurants first.
And just at that moment, because already there's a lot in that in terms of work and planning at that point. So were you making it in your own kitchen? Were you sourcing it from another supplier? How did you just go knock on doors of restaurants? How did that happen?
So we manufactured it in my parents' factory to begin with. We had a small area because they already made the traditional mochi, but we had to buy little bits of kit to sort of like change it for ice cream and change the recipe, because ice cream is very different to red bean and it all has to go together. It's quite technical, so I won't bore you with that. But there was a lot of work behind that sort of product development. Yeah. So we spent, I think, 2 years perfecting that.
2 years, even before you pitched the restaurants.
Yeah, wow. We had to have a perfect product before we pitched it to the market. So yeah, before we even launch the business, we spent 2 years in the background sort of perfecting the product. And then I literally just went knocking on doors. I would go and cold call chefs. I'd go Nobu and I'd say, hi, can I speak to the head pastry chef? And he'd come out, and then, you know, we sort of built a rapport. But you also meet them at trade shows. So like the restaurant show, I met a lot of chefs there. And then as chefs move around different kitchens, they sort of spread the news. So it was quite slow, but it was quite rewarding. And it was nice that we grew quite slowly. So we learned how to scale up in a sort of controlled way, learned how our system should be, accounting, everything like that. So we're quite lucky that it wasn't super fast growth at the beginning, because we were a little bit clueless.
That's, well, everybody is right at that stage, but the 2-year process to get to that even first sale is a long time. So how did you stay like motivated and focused during that time? And who else was involved at this point?
My brother. So my brother and I co-founded Little Moons together. Look, it was hard. We both moved in together. I've mentioned this before, like to save money. We lived in separate apartments before, but and that's tough. You're working all day together. You go home, you're living in the same space, small flat, on top of each other. You never get a chance to switch off. So it was really tough times. But I think when you're doing something that you have a purpose and a vision, and it's your thing, it's not because someone's making you work till midnight. You want to do it, and you're super passionate about it. It doesn't seem like work. So, you know, we've had some tough times, but I think someone once asked me, have I ever thought about giving up? And absolutely not. We've had some super tough times, but I've never thought about giving up.
And final question on this sort of early stage, Vivian, of Little Moons, funding, was it yours and your brother's savings? Did you bootstrap it? Were you working full time whilst you were doing this in the evenings?
So we bootstrapped it. We saved some money whilst we were working. Our parents helped us out with a little bit of money as well. And we just grew it really, really slowly. And I think we're quite unusual, because I have been doing it for over 10 years now, but we don't have any outside investment. We've done it a really slow, steady way.
Fantastic. Sometimes everyone's in such a rush, but I think one of the things, there you go, Ben's applauding along with lots of others. Over 200 people with us now, which is fantastic. So many more questions for you, Vivian, but we'll come to Neil now, and the Vurger company. Tell us about your birth story of that business.
Yeah, so it all happened quite organically, really. So before we did the Vurger Co, and we, in this instance, is myself and my partner, Rachel. And Rachel's my partner in life and business, so I completely understand Vivian's what Vivian said about, you know, living in the same space as the person you're co-founding a business with. It's challenging. It can be.
Which was first, Neil? Sorry to be nosy.
Or the relationship years before. Okay. Yeah, long time. But we
sometimes occasionally it happens the other way around, but probably more stable the way you did it.
Yeah, no, it's good. It's fun. It's I wouldn't change it, but it does get stressful for sure. You can't switch off very easily. But no, we were doing very different things before. So Rachel and I have always been crazy about food. Always had that, you know, thing where you go into a restaurant and you're like, oh, we could do this. You know, it's easy, right? We could do this. We've got great ideas, and wouldn't it be nice one day to do this? So we've always had that like buzzing around in our brains, but we've never really acted on it. A long time ago, I ran a cleaning business. I started a cleaning business. This was probably about 10 years ago. And that went well for a little while. I was working as a property manager for a few London agents before that, on coming to London just after uni. So I got to know cleaning companies, and then I got into cleaning, and then I did that for about 18 months. And it was good for a while, but, you know, challenging. And then I kind of realized, actually, this isn't something I'm passionate about. And again, touching on what Vivian was just saying, you've got to be, you know, if you're going to run a business which is going to take a lot of time, a lot of effort, a lot of pain, a lot of sacrifice, you've really got to love what you're doing, and you've got to understand why you're doing it. Otherwise, it doesn't make any sense. So that didn't last. I then went into banking. Which wasn't a terrible decision. I'm actually, my skills and my kind of interests and my brain actually lend themselves fairly well to what I was doing. But I just started getting to the point where, you know, I'd done it for, I think, about 5 years at the time. And I just got to the point where I was getting home every day and just thinking, like, what am I doing? You know, what am I actually, like, what impact am I having here? I'm not terribly dissatisfied with my job, but equally it doesn't, you know, thinking about doing this for the next 30 years just killed me. So yeah, Rachel and I kind of were coming to the same conclusion at the same time. She was actually a luxury fashion buyer. which she adored. That was like her dream career. She worked since uni to get there, and kind of climbed the ladder that way. She worked for a bunch of different people, a couple of high street people. She worked for Harrods. She then went over, we went over to Dubai. We lived over there for a little while she did the job over there, and then we came back. And we just kind of got to this point at the same time where we were both just having that same niggle, where we were just feeling like, okay, something just isn't clicking here for us. We turned 30. We went on this big trip to California to celebrate primarily. And I should say at this point, I was literally the world's biggest meat eater. I would be amazed if there was a bigger meat eater than I was at the time. So I definitely wasn't going into this holiday with like a plan to turn vegan or anything like that. In parallel, for about 10 years, I'd been suffering with major stomach problems. And it wasn't any of the normal stuff that, you get kind of diagnosed with, and any of the common things that people are aware of. I went to about 6 different doctors. I had all sorts of tests. I had a camera shoved down my throat, which for anyone who's had that will know it's really unpleasant. We just never got anywhere with it. We never got to a diagnosis. No doctor could quite figure out what was going on. So I just decided, after being diagnosed with nothing and given acid tablets to basically take indefinitely, I decided, well, I'm not going to do that. So when we were on this holiday in California, just to bring it back to the actual direction of travel, we just accidentally started eating more and more vegan food. We found ourselves in great restaurants, which this was back in early 2016. It was just a lot more advanced than London was at the time. Restaurants you could go and they weren't saying, hey, I'm a vegan restaurant, welcome vegans. It was just like, I'm an awesome restaurant. There's 200 people in here, and guess what? Everything's vegan. So I just accidentally started eating more and more that way. Rachel had kind of always had a tendency to be vegetarian, vegan anyway. We got to the end of the holiday. I barely touched meat, and we were just like, wow, there's a huge opportunity here to do something like this, give our own spin on it, but do it in London, which at the time, hard to believe now, of course, but at the time was pretty early stage in terms of great vegan restaurants. There were a few, but it's a great
story, Neil, and I love the way how the vegan cult tricked you into eating the food.
They did.
It's like
becoming vegan. Can you believe that?
Unbelievable. And it's all okay. And how's your health been since you personally shifted?
Superb. I mean, I'm overweight now since the last 18 months because I've eaten way too much junk and I've been too stressed. But aside from those kind of normal day-to-day things, my health in terms of my stomach has been perfect. I'm really not. I'm quite cynical. I'm really not one of those miracle cure type people. But I mean, I can only put it down to what I must have been eating and what I'm now not eating. And I think on reflection, probably red meat and dairy for me and for a lot of people was probably the problem.
Right, it's really interesting. I'm surprised I didn't see you on that Netflix documentary about athletes who've gone vegan, And
sadly not an athlete. That's not on my CV, unfortunately.
That's the next part of the career. There's so many different parts to it. Final question for you, Neil, before we go to Ben,
sure.
is on like the first version of your product. So how did you go from like you had this like Viven, this want to bring in an idea from another part of the world and innovate on it. So how did you get version 1 out?
So I think the thing for us was the concept as opposed to the product itself. So we always knew the product would iterate. Rachel and I weren't chefs, but we're pretty good home cooks, always have been. But we knew the product wouldn't be the last product. So for us, it was about the concept. The concept at the time didn't really exist in London, which was just a great burger restaurant, something really casual and accessible that people could come to and enjoy, bring their friends who aren't vegan. And hey, guess what? It just happens to be vegan. So for us, that was like the thing we really focused on from the start. The product itself, we made a bunch of recipes ourselves at home. We would work Monday to Friday. We would make all the products at home on a Saturday. And then we used to do Sunday markets around London. So Tottenham, Shoreditch. We did a bunch of different ones, different events and things like that. So yeah, for us, the product, looking back now, if you tried it now, it probably wouldn't be that exciting. But at the time, it was good. It was decent. And it was decent enough to get the ball rolling and for us to start learning from customers.
Fantastic. And you can answer this question later, but I want to talk about vegan cheese and why there is a solution there, because that's been the biggest barrier for me, and I know many people, is the dairy side of the experience, which is but now there are so many great solutions. All right, Ben, Seedlip. Now, I feel like the Seedlip story from my perspective was one of those things where, oh my God, they've invented something 5 years too early here, because it just stood out a mile, which is fantastic. But at the same time, it was like, is the world ready, or is the UK ready to invest, decent money into a bottle of something that doesn't have booze or alcohol in it? So tell us your version of the journey. Where did the idea of Seedlip begin?
I mean, I firstly, Ben, I think if I'd properly listened and taken on board all of the people that thought that Seedlip was the most ridiculous idea ever and would never sell a bottle, and there was no point. I'm really glad I didn't kind of listen to that too much. But I've not said this before. It feels like a really cheesy thing to say, but I literally feel like I was born to do Seedlip. And partly because my mother's side of my family, have been farming for 320 years in the north of England, still farming today. I live on a farm now, nature I absolutely adore. And then my dad is in the world of brand design. So sort of aged 8, 9 years old, I was sort of like, hey, I want to sit in tractors and I want to learn about grain and I want to be out in the fields. But also I'm kind of intrigued by what dad's up to and learning about these things called consumers and brands and the impact that design can have. And, then the third piece was, I left school and I learned to be a chef. So I sort of feel like from a flavor, nature, and a kind of design and innovation perspective, Seedlip was just sort of waiting to happen. I was running my own design business. I definitely didn't want to sit on the tractors anymore in the school holidays. I was more intrigued by the kind of world of design. So I spent my career helping other founders and bigger brands bring their brands to life in kind of relevant and meaningful ways to the public, and was quite happy doing that and busy and had my own agency, not looking for anything else. But what I was doing and getting really stuck into was growing stuff at home, herbs, veg, and I'm sure many of you will know that you walk into a supermarket and the fresh herb variety on offer is pretty slim. There's 7 or 8 pots. You buy a basil plant, great intentions, it dies 3 days later. Anyway, I was like, what other herbs can we grow? What else have we lost, forgotten? I learned that there are 47,000 edible plants, and that was kind of like, wow, that's pretty incredible. So I started growing lots of different things, and found my way through Wikipedia links and the internet to a scanned copy of a book called The Art of Distillation. If you Google The Art of Distillation PDF, you'll find what I found. And there's 200 ingredients mentioned in there, but it's a recipe book for herbal remedies using distillation as the method of extraction. And some were alcoholic and some were non-alcoholic. And I just, I like arts and crafts. I like working with my hands. It wasn't actually that unusual for me to get on the internet and buy a little 2.5 litre copper still and start playing around in my kitchen trying to copy some of these recipes. And that was it. Evenings, weekends, happy, opened this sort of Pandora's box of 500 years of botanical history. Fascinating. I love nature. I love history. I like ingredients and flavor. And I like process and gadgets and, engineering, kind of making things.
So it sounds been so much of an indulgence of your curiosities and in life, all in that sort of exploration. When did it tip into like, business career opportunity?
And I'm sorry, I'm going to swear here, but when I got served a really fucking disgusting, fruity, sweet, pink, childish mocktail in a nice restaurant that shall not be named in London.
Oh, come on.
Cannot be named. And it definitely wasn't a lightning bulb moment, but it was definitely I feel like an idiot. this doesn't go with the food. I don't really want to finish this. And I just left thinking, this is 2013. And I just left thinking, how hard can it be? How hard can it be to get a decent non-alcoholic? I don't care why you're not drinking alcohol. You should be able to get decent options. And I thought, do you know what? Maybe there's something in what I'm doing at home. Maybe there's something in the family farm, my dad's experience, my own experience, and maybe someone else also feels really pissed off. And if there's one other person, then my idea of kind of creating something in 6 months and launching 5 products at a farmer's market, which was my original plan, seemed to be a doable kind of thing. 2 years later, there was one product in one size, launching in Selfridges in London. That was November the 4th, 2015.
That date is imprinted on your soul, and so like Vivian and in some ways like Neil as well, that there was a long period of product development in playing with these botanicals and a full education process. How did you stay motivated at that point to go for it? Because obviously the passion is there, but the business case must have been like lots of doubts around it.
I signed up to loads of these crowdfunding sites. I'll probably get myself in trouble now, but I signed myself up to lots of these crowdfunding sites to get people's business plans, to have a look at what the hell is a business plan. And I bought Business for Dummies, literally I've got the book. And I thought maybe I need a co-founder, maybe I need someone else to help. I met a few people. That wasn't really kind of sticking. But I learned, I fell in love with Excel. Knowing your numbers is really fucking important, regardless of whether you are an accountant or not. You must know your numbers, because it will help you make the best decisions. In my kind of experience, I've made my best decisions by being able to read numbers and tell a story and then make decisions. So it was, listening to you, Vivian, saying that, guy, you just wanted to keep going. I fucking hated it. I wanted to, especially when we launched and it all kind of started going nuts, I wanted to pack it in every week. I was completely overwhelmed.
And it going nuts in terms of there was a lot of buzz, there was demand straight away. So the immediate success felt overwhelming.
Well, I had my lovely sales forecast, and I made 1,000 bottles, and those 1,000 bottles were going to sell out in 5 months, and that was going to be nice. And we're going to do a bit of PR. We're going to do a few events. I learned how to bartend at home so I could make some drinks for people. And, the 1,000 bottles sold out in 3 weeks. And we heard from 100 countries in the first 3 months. And suddenly I'm walking into Buckingham Palace, 4 months after we launch. And it kind of completely blew my plans and expectations away in a good way, in the sense that, wow, maybe there's something here. But also I don't know how to deal with this. I wasn't prepared for this. I just wanted to quietly tiptoe out there. And the market is shouting back some nice things and some unnice things, as you can imagine, which is piss being a real highlight of a review that we got early on of someone's comments of what it tasted like. But it's one that I hold on to, But yeah, I wasn't very prepared, and the first 3 batches I made, and then I hired a white transit van and drove 6.5 hours up to a bottler in Lancashire, and rented a bottling line and put 7,000 bottles down that line and put them all in the back of the lorry, drove them back down south, and then had labeling parties of people, pulling favors to come in and label bottles, which, if you've seen our bottles, they've got very big labels and not a lot of room for error in terms of creasing. So yeah, guys, it's slightly painful to think back on these days.
Well, thank you for going back into the pain for us, Ben. But I can hear in your storytelling that tension between what is a quite sort of specific, persistent, like precise kind of artist and scientific approach to life and work, with the chaos of a startup, right? And then that's where these two things. But thankfully, you went for it, just like Neil and Vivian did too. And here we are today, and everyone's admiring and applauding what you've built. the three of you. So I want to move. Thank you so much for sharing those stories. There's so much value in that, and I'm sure everyone has really enjoyed listening. I want to dive into some of the core food and drink sort of elements now. So product development, storytelling and branding, and then some thoughts around mission and sustainability. So on product development, you've all shared about how you did your first versions. One of the questions that often comes up is like, what should I go, how much should I perfect this? How should I go? Should I just go to markets and iterate? Should I go straight to Selfridges or a Whole Foods or whoever it is? Like, how did you guys figure that out beyond going to Selfridges and like the restaurants initially? Like, what was your strategy? Because it's a very different path, isn't it? Going to buyers versus trying to sell door to door. Neil, what did you, was it buying a restaurant space? How did you go like figure out what you were going to do?
Yeah, it's a good question. We were lucky in a way that we did markets and festivals and pop-ups and things like that for about a year before more than that, maybe 18 months before we opened the restaurant.
So you had your own van and you just drove around and...
Yeah, not even that. We would turn up with our like gazebo and put it on a market stall and kind of learn that way, and I think it doesn't feel like the thing you want to do at the time. Like if you'd asked me at the time, there's no way I wanted to be standing there doing that. But at the same time, we learned so much, the product improved so much. We then caught the attention of some decent kind of chefs who worked with us along the way. It enabled us to build a following, which really helped us when we came to things like crowdfunding and opening the first restaurant. So I think it's easy to kind of look back and make sense of everything. But at the time, yeah, you kind of just have to, in our example, you kind of had to just get out there and get something rolling. We were pretty confident with the product we made first. I kind of alluded to it being a bit of a work in progress. It was decent, I'm not.
So was the product just one burger, or was it a number of?
I think
is that a menu.
No, I think we made about 3 or 4, and we would make like different quantities of each, and then we would make something completely different the next week, and then you kind of gradually learn what sticks. But also then you've got this other thing happening, which is the way the market is moving outside of what you're doing. So we started off with totally veg-based patties. In our minds, it was like, oh, why isn't this a big thing? Why isn't anybody doing this in a restaurant? It works. There's a market for it, and we still have those patties now, like different versions of different vegetables and different ways we can put plants together. There is also now a major trend, which is people going into more kind of meat substitute type products. So that's also something that we had to sort of pivot a little bit and kind of welcome those burgers into the fold as well, and those products into the fold. But yeah, you just have to kind of, for us anyway, we had to learn as we went along and improve things as we went along.
But there's such a big difference here that you make the point of between people who are working on like fairly lean tech startup ideas, or even other service related ideas. When you want to like test a new product or service, you can build a first version and get it out to your A/B list it, whatever, quite quickly, and have the data and the feedback back quite quickly. The whole Tim Ferriss approach to marketing. But in food and drink, you can do a little bit of the market, right, with testing. But when you're developing a whole product line, that like bringing in a meatless burger, that's a big decision. So do you just go, is it all instinct, or are you all like data driven?
A bit of both, I think. And I think there's a big difference as well. I should say, like, we were going at the time only into restaurants. At the time we didn't have products that we sold in supermarkets. So I think there's a big difference between getting a restaurant product out there, iterating it on a market store, and then launching a restaurant. And you can still make mistakes in the restaurant. You can still get a dish wrong. You can still get a special wrong. It doesn't sell. You try something else next month. So there's a bit more forgiveness in that side of our business. Sure. Whereas if we put out a product in a supermarket that is terrible, which thankfully we've not yet done, touching wood here in case you can't see, then I think that's a much less forgiving world. And I think Ben and Viven will probably be able to kind of speak a little bit more to that. Whereas I think you can't make those mistakes when it comes to supermarket buyers. They're just pretty, I mean, they're great to work with. They're very supportive, but you get stuff wrong and you don't really you're lucky if you get a second chance.
Yeah, it's a high risk, big reward game, isn't it? And Viven, just coming over to you, like product journey of Little Moons, which is such a technically, I can imagine, difficult thing to iterate on quickly. Or is it not?
No, it was difficult, and I think the texture is particularly challenging. And it's funny hearing Ben saying how people described his drink as, was it witch's juice or something? Because I've heard we did some consumer testing, and people described mochi as eating a slug or eating an eyeball, which is just delightful. Sounds yummy. But Ben and I think we also use the same branding agency too.
Yeah.
For our brands, but so for our product, I mean, I guess our journey was like you said, Neil. We tested it in the restaurants. I wasn't sure which flavors to develop, but I thought, because we were going to Asian restaurants, I developed my Asian flavors first. And I'm actually quite proud that I don't have a degree in product development or anything, but the recipes of coconut mango and a few of them are still the original the original recipes that I personally came up with, even though we've gone through development with chefs and professional chefs and product developers now. We've tweaked some of my recipes, but some of the flavors are still the ones that I had. And so I think we refined that in the restaurants because we could keep improving it because we didn't do big batches of it. But we started getting emails from people asking if they could buy mochi from us. And I was like, I don't advertise anywhere. We only sell like packages to the restaurants. How do you know that we supply mochi to them? And someone had written, well, I climbed through the bins of Yo Sushi because I could see I'm taking these mochis out of these packs. And I thought, well, they obviously don't make them. Where are they coming from? And they're really expensive there. So can I buy them directly from you? And we kept getting emails like this, not people going through bins, but hearing that we were the people that made these mochis for the restaurants. And so at that time, we thought, you know what, we're probably ready for the grocery stores, for the supermarkets, because we're starting to be better, more widely known. And that's when we emailed Whole Foods, and they emailed us back 2 minutes later.
Wow.
And he said, you had me at mochi. And we were really nervous. Like you said, it's really hard to get into these stores. The buyers are so busy. They've got hundreds of brands, sort of emailing them all the time. But so we weren't expecting to hear back from them for 6 months or something. And they emailed us back straight away. And that's how we launched from restaurants into grocery stores. So we started in Whole Foods. Then we went to Ocado, Waitrose, Tesco's, and so on.
I think that people listening will be impressed and also surprised to hear these stories, because there's an assumption now that everything's direct to consumer, Instagram ad campaigns or community building, and off we go. Which is, but it sounds like that this has gone differently. And Ben, presumably for you as well, because Seedlip was launched kind of pre-Instagram, or at least selling food and drink on Instagram, right? So what was your route to market after Selfridges?
Yeah, I was one of those people who was really against buying anything online. Like, I'm not great with technology, but I like seeing the real things. And now, and so you couldn't buy Seedlip from Seedlip's website. I was adamant for probably the first 18 months that was just not going to happen. And then, started to build a much cleverer team than me. And then people, were like, no, we kind of can make this work. It was really important for a distilled non-alcoholic spirit that sounds weird and was new and unique, and no one had a clue what it was, how it was made, what to do with it. And no one knew who I was. So credibility by association and the advocacy and reputation of the people that thought it was good was absolutely critical. And therefore, people started to take a bit of notice when you're in Selfridges. People take a bit of notice when you're served in Michelin star restaurants or by top cocktail bars or have top bartenders, thinking that your product's great. So we sort of created that real halo around the Seedlip brand by just trying to find the best people and the most influential people within food and drink. And
to that decision, that very deliberate decision, Ben, I mean, it's an echo of the quality of the product and those years of research that you did into the art of distillation and so on. But I remember seeing it and go, okay, a 25-30 pound bottle of something that hasn't got alcohol in it, that's surprising. Now, I was way down the chain in the supermarket probably when I saw it, but I remember having a drink with Andy, who I normally host Virgin StartUp with, who's the CEO of Virgin StartUp. My last drink I had with him 2 years ago, and he bought Seedlip on a barge in Paddington. And he's like, I've always loved this brand. And I was like, the perception around pricing. So let's just go there for a moment. Like, did you go to pricing? Did you make the decision on pricing because that's what it cost? Did you do it because that's what you thought it was worth in terms of its value to the customer?
it was triangulating a few different things, I guess. Firstly, okay, it's quite expensive to make and it takes me a long time to make. And I need to use a lot of raw materials and a lot of real brilliant, wonderful ingredients to make these products. So there's a kind of bottom up, okay, what does it cost me to make? I did want to have a business that was had a kind of fighting chance of some success. So there was that element of kind of just making it commercially viable and being able to invest in the brand and the business going forward. There was another aspect of referencing from alcohol bottles and their pricing and what was going on with the premiumization of spirits in the UK, certainly, and now all over the world. And so kind of coming down from, sort of super premium bottle of spirits. And then there's the actual drink price. And if I kind of said to someone that, a Seedlip and tonic at home, all in, is probably about £1.50 for a really good non-alcoholic option, I think that sounds pretty good. But when you're faced with a bottle that's 25 quid plus of something that you've never heard of and you don't know what it's going to taste like, and it doesn't have alcohol in, that's been a really interesting barrier and challenge as we've kind of scaled the business. But I'm super proud that Seedlip is still $29.99 in Selfridges 5.5 years later, whilst we've expanded quite considerably across grocery and internationally.
Yeah, you should be proud. And also the fact that it's a great lesson. Pricing, not necessarily high in your mind, but from a market's point of view, high up at the start. You can always discount from a high price point. You can't, it's much harder to go the other way. Neil and Vivian, quickly on pricing, I'd love to hear how do you figure out your own pricing strategy? Vivian, Little Moons.
I think we tried to peg ourselves against other sort of premium ice cream brands. Back then it was Haagen-Dazs and Ben & Jerry's. So we just sort of put ourselves alongside that because I think it would be either you buy Little Moons or Ben & Jerry's. So that's kind of where we started.
Yeah, so looking at competition, and that's worked okay. Yeah, Neil, what about yourself?
I think it's interesting what Ben was saying. The perception is that if it's not got alcohol, then it ought to be cheaper. Well, it's the same with us. People would think, oh well, if it doesn't have meat, then it ought to be cheaper. It takes probably 4 times as long to make our products than it does a meat burger. So I think there is that we're getting there. We're getting there with pricing, and obviously the more people who are eating these products now, the better the pricing is with suppliers. But it is really a kind of production cost driven thing for us. And then of course we try and match it as best we can to the market. Often our products aren't exactly directly comparable, so again it's quite difficult to do. And with our retail products, which are only a year old, so our condiments, which are in Selfridges, Whole Foods, Planet Organic, those same sorts of places, that's really a production thing. Our volumes at the moment, they're good, but they're not at a level where we can massively reduce the production costs. So we're in the same kind of situation as everybody here probably has been and is about to be. It's a challenge, but pricing is definitely something we're trying to progressively get lower.
It's great to hear. And I want to move swiftly on to like branding, and that ties in nicely to impact and mission. And then if anyone's got questions on it, I can see a bunch going in. They're on the Q&A, so you can upvote each other there. We've got a few minutes. We're racing through this hour, so we're going to need every single minute of it because there's so much to discuss. As long as the energy is still good in the rest of this room here, I feel like it is from where I'm sitting. But I wanted to ask about the branding. So Ben and Vivian, you've always said, I think we shared the same brand agency. For those that are starting out now, the food and drink game, it seems to attract talent when it comes to branding and storytelling. Do you think that's an accident? How did you figure it out? How did you choose a branding agency? Can you do it without one? Vivian, what's been your journey with the brand?
Oh, I don't know. You should ask Ben that. He's in that. He comes from that market. How did I do it? We started off with, I guess, a smaller market, so branding agency that named our brand, and we did go to market with an original packaging. And I guess that's one of the things is you don't have to wait till your product is perfect or your packaging is perfect or you've got it just so. We launched it. The first branding wasn't quite right, and so we went to Pearl Fisher, who did our second branding, and just refined it. I mean, we learned from it. We didn't have the product on the front, it wasn't to scale. People didn't understand it. They didn't understand how much was mochi. So we had to put a picture of a product cut in half. And so all of that sort of, because, you know, your front of pack is your, I think someone calls it packvertising. That's the only area where you can advertise your product on the shelf. So it's really got to tell the whole story about your product all on.
Yeah, it's hard.
Plus all the additional, you know, regulatory things you need to add on as well. So, so yeah, it's been a journey for us for sure. It wasn't just one go and it's perfect.
But presumably by having that first attempt yourself, that you got the lessons so that when you did spend the money, you were able to like go, not this at least, and then get some guide. So what did you call it? Was it called something else?
No, it was always called Little Moons.
Okay.
Packaging looked differently.
So you just reminded me of we worked with Pip and Murray in the early days, and if you're not in the UK, you probably wouldn't have heard of this amazing premium nut butter brand, which has sort of taken over. And she was like crushing nuts into her jars in like the shed in the garden at the Escape the City house in Battersea, where I was working at the time, after she won a competition, and then building a fan base online and so on. And her thing was like she talked about the pack devising and like the real estate. You've got such a minimal space with food and drink to like pack the whole story in. It's not like this big. People don't tend to go to the websites until they're buying the product. So, and she made this bold decision to put palm oil free, like right next to the brand name and logo. And I asked her about it, and she said that captures the mission and like the product in one phrase. And so it's a bold decision, but it paid off for her. And so for you, Neil, how did you figure out the branding of the Vurger company? Because it's so slick and like well done. Was it always that way?
Thank you. We put a lot of effort into it, for sure. It wasn't always like it is now, but we were kind of lucky. We've never used a branding agency, so we've never spent major money on branding or design or anything like that. So we were quite lucky. So one of Rachel's best friend is from the fashion world, an ex-colleague of hers, a wonderful artist, very, very talented. She is a fashion designer, graphic designer. So anything like that is her kind of game. So in the beginning, we had help from her, and we quickly realized, you know, it sounds like a silly thing for a restaurant to have a graphic designer, but you don't realize just how much stuff there is always to design. You know, we're doing menus, we're doing screens, we're doing POS information for customers every day, we're doing stickers, you know, you name it, we've got to design it pretty much every day. So we very quickly realized that she was more than just Rachel's best friend. She was probably someone we needed to hire. So we hired her quite early on. She's now our brand director, and she's actually just hired someone to work with her as well. So we do invest, I suppose, in a way, in brand and in design and things like that. But it's not with an agency. It's all in-house with us.
And as Ben will probably want to add in here, like branding is not just what it looks like, right, Ben? It's everything pretty much.
Yeah, it is, and I know I'm biased to this, right? But I cannot stress enough and just the importance of investing in your brand and its design. You know, branding has got a lot better. The quality, everybody can make something look nice now. And there are designers all over the world that will design you a logo for £5. You know, access to design has never been easier. But the kind of the quality, there's a really big difference between a pretty pack and a memorable and meaningful brand.
Yeah, and telling the story that goes with it, which the three of you all done. So Anna is asking here, how much of your budget is spent on branding, marketing versus product development? I mean, that must have shifted all the way through. But in your case, Ben, with Seedlip, like, what does that split look like?
Well, I gave some equity in the business to Pearl Fisher, who are our design agency. That was how I did it. And I managed to get I part funded it and gave some equity away, such was, I guess, my belief in design. And then I brought design in-house for the last 5 years. So we work with the agency on the core assets, but then I have a team of 2 designers in the US, 3 designers here in the UK, and we brought design in-house. Much like Neil was saying, menus, literature, you know, POS, there is so much social, digital ads. That's a lot of work. And by having people in-house, you get full-time, 100% focus, and it is way, way cheaper.
And Tim, Emma, and quite a few are all asking about when. So when you decide to move this question for all of you, move from going like freelancers, outsource, DIY to like, I'm going for employment, is it all just driven by the finance, or is it some just gut instinct? Vivian, how do you go? Sorry, Ben, go ahead.
Yeah, it's a bit of gut instinct on need, you know, having a couple of freelancers that you might be working with. I kind of feel like there's a bit of intuition stacked up with how's performance and how the numbers coupled with investment and kind of growth plans, and just kind of maybe taking the small risk to invest ahead in somebody and bring them in so that you can kind of use that as part of fueling the growth.
Yeah. Same for you, Neil and Vivian?
Yeah, I mean, we were very focused on the brand very early on. Even though we were doing market stalls and pop-ups, we didn't look like your average market stall and pop-up. So yeah, we probably at the beginning, although the money is, you know, tiny now looking back, but we probably spent more than was needed on branding early on, but probably not in the same way as Ben. But then as we've moved on, you know, we're still spending a lot of money. We're employing a fairly senior person. We've just employed a second full-time person. So we are spending, you know, a decent chunk of money every year on branding, but it's not quite in the same way. But yeah, I think it's essential. I think if you're gonna start anything now, it's super competitive. There isn't a category that isn't starting to get congested. So I think you really do have to, and it's exactly what Ben said. It's not just making the package look pretty. It's far more than that. It's telling a story and making sure that your brand is memorable in 3 seconds on a shelf.
Yeah, just like the examples you all gave us at the start of the evening. Vivian, branding, product dev, equal.
I'm unlike Ben. I didn't understand branding as a language. It just wasn't, you know, in my vernacular from where I've come from in my past career. So I actually went through quite a few design agencies. It was expensive and it was, you know, it was time consuming, but we finally learned how to write a really good brief, basically. And I think it's really key to get it all in the brief. And I think we briefed agencies incorrectly, and that's why we didn't get the outcome that we wanted to. But also, you were just saying something about, I think branding is really important, but it's equally important to have a really good product there. And I feel like everyone's really spent time making sure that their vegan products are great and Seedlip's super delicious, because I think even if you brand something really well, if it's not great, I don't know if it will fly. So it really is quite important to get both right, I think.
Well, and food and drink is the ultimate trust that you're putting in your body. It's word of mouth, right? It's everything. So yeah, you got to nail the product. Now listen, we're almost out of time. So what I thought I'd do is come in with a massive question with 3 minutes to go, just to hit hard. But this is, if we zoom out a little bit, and the world is changing so fast, not just because of the pandemic, but for lots of other reasons. And food and the future of food, whether you're looking at like moving away from meat or dairy, or thinking about your relationship with alcohol, or thinking about how you celebrate your life in new ways and different ways with like desserts and so on. Like, what is the purpose of Food and Startup Drink now? Like, is it more, does it matter more today than it did when some of you started out like a decade ago? And what part can the startup movement play in like fixing some of the big problems in the food and drink industry, whether it's whether it's social or environmental? Where I'd love to hear your thoughts on that as we wrap this conversation up. Whoever wants to be brave and jump in first, go for it.
I'd just say that we need like this new, or not so new, but I guess the recent wave of people doing business in a different way and for different reasons, beyond just profit, is amazing to see. And it definitely feels like there's a great groundswell of that happening. But ultimately, for it to really cut through and have an impact, a lot of these businesses have got to get big, right? It's not going to work if there are a million tiny businesses. With I guess a bigger impact and a bigger business comes more responsibility and more opportunity for influence. And that's certainly why I want Seedlip to be as big as it can, because I believe that then it can have more of a good positive impact. And I don't think there's anything wrong with wanting a really big business. You know, it's not about the money, but it is the way that brands like Patagonia, etc., can have a really meaningful influence in our lives.
Yeah, we never needed it more. And I know lots of people, even through our little community at Rebel Book Club, where we used to serve cocktails all the time, and the mocktail demand has gone through the roof. So, you know, we've served plenty of Seedlip over the last few years, and people love it. Vivian, what's your perspective on the purpose of food and drink?
I think I completely agree with Ben, and I think something that I feel very lucky about is that in a world where I feel quite out of control right now, I can control how I run my business and how I treat my staff, and you know, during this period of uncertainty, to make sure that you say to everyone, you know, it's going to be fine. What sort of things, like, you know, just treat people as human beings, which is I've come from an industry that can be a little bit tough, like in banking and stuff. So I really wanted to make sure that my team felt cared for, and you do all the sort of go the extra mile for your team to make sure. And you know, one of the things is we wanted to give everyone healthcare, you know, all our factory workers and things, which I think, you know, because I care very much about health, but it wasn't actually something that they wanted, but we've done other things that they've wanted and stuff. So it's been a learning curve, but yes, it's definitely something that I feel really proud that I'm able to make a real change in people's lives. Yeah.
Fantastic, thank you, Neil.
Yeah, I mean, both excellent. I would agree with both. But I think for me, food and drink is everything. You know, it's emotion, and it connects people. And you know, look what's happening now. People are allowed to go outside, and what do they want to do? They want to go to a pub. They want to go to a restaurant. It's something that connects us all, and it's something that I think will continue to educate us all. Sadly, we've had. Well, I suppose sadly it's easy to say that now, but at the time it was just growing. So we've got a bit of a broken system. You know, we've got a broken food system in general, and I think events, sadly, like the last 18 months, have really kind of brought that to the surface. And I think there's just a lot more awareness now. Food is a great driver of conversation. And food is a great kind of thing to enlighten people and to spark new ideas and to move things in different directions. So yeah, I think food and drink is immensely important for sure.
And I love how, you know, you're building a vegan company without basically telling people we all have to become vegan. I think that's you know, a non-alcoholic company. It's like this way of like, just build something that's awesome, tell a great story. And food is all about celebration and community. So I feel like with leaders and creators like yourselves, and there are many, many others, it feels like a renaissance of good food and drink at the moment. And it's not just the products themselves, it's the events around them, and the way we're doing dining in different ways and community in different ways. And, you know, all these pop-up parks and markets and so on. It's a really exciting time. And it's a great way to educate and inspire. So big thank you to the three of you for starting, because you did, and you went through those early years of resilience. So that was great to hear about, and sort of detailed, like teaching yourself a whole new world and getting these things out into the world. So thank you for doing that, for all of us who've enjoyed your products, and also for tonight, for giving us your time. Vivian, Neil, and Ben, thanks very much for being part of Virgin Startup tonight. It's been great to have you with us.
Thank you.
Yes.